Hey everyone, just a short little video about groups, some additional things you should know. And the first thing is that very often you want to kind of invert the selection of a group. So when you, let's say, have a scatter here and then you group a certain area with a bounding box and then bounding sphere, sometimes you might want the exact opposite, so the outside. And what you might find is that you can't invert the selection here in the group itself, which can be annoying. But the good news is it doesn't matter, because whatever you want to do, let's say we want to blast this away, you can just invert the group. So here I just choose my group 1. I was lazy in the naming, as you can see. And to invert this, you just put an exclamation mark in front. And now you have inverted it. This is coming from programming, by the way. So whenever you want to invert some logic, then you can put an exclamation mark in front of it. We will see that in a later video. But just keep that in mind in almost every case. That also is true, for any other node that has a group parameter. Here we can do the exact same. So if we want to turn not just the center red, but the actual opposite, then we just put an exclamation mark in front of it and it should work. Now, a small addition for Houdini 20. Side effects notice that not a lot of people know this function, or that it might be unnecessarily complicated. So actually they now added a group invert node that didn't exist before. So you edit before you want to use the group, and the group name group 1, let's say, will just be automatically inverted if you just put it into the group name, or you could invert it by creating a second group that then will be added. So group 2, for example, and of course, as you can imagine, the group 2 is then the inversion of group 1. So group invert, much easier now, but I think sometimes it's still good to know that you can use an exclamation mark instead. But thankfully in Houdini 20 now we have multiple options. And then there are actually other ways of creating groups. And we've already seen that with the group node, you have a couple of different options. You can select by a bounding box like this, or you can select by the normals, which can be really handy. All of these things we have seen. But there's even more flexibility when using another node called the group expression node. Because this allows you to use actually Vex expressions, and Vex is something we haven't talked about too much yet. We will talk about this way more. It's the programming language basically of Houdini and very powerful, but you don't even need to know much about Vex to use that node, because here under Vex expression, here you define the name of the group that you want to create. Up here you create the group type, primitives or points and so on. But here under Vex expression, you can write in a Vex code, so to say, that describes what you want to select. And when you use the drop-down menu, you can see there are a couple of already existing codes for you that you can try out. And one thing, for example, that is interesting is a 30% chance of selecting a face in this case, or let's say a point. Or we could say we only want select everything where the x coordinate is less than 0, which selects the left part of our toy. Or we can, of course, also change this code. So what this can be helpful for is to give you a starting point, and then you can remember those codes and change it yourself. Once we learn more about Vex, you will be able to define those codes yourself, but already going through all these existing presets can give you a good idea of what's possible, basically. And maybe if you just play around with them, you have get a good idea of what you can do with this. So this is kind of a step on top of what the group node can already do. Here, for example, you have the option to only select triangles, and you can see you can read this out by using the attribute numVTX. The same is true when you want to select quads, or maybe if you want to select every face that is built of 5 points. So you can always change this code to whatever you want. So a lot of interesting options in here. And like I said, later on, you will be able to put in your own code into this. For example, we could say, okay, if the position of y is higher than 0.1, then select the point. And this is what's happening here, which, by the way, is similar to the already existing x coordinate less than 0. All you have to change here is the y element. So look into this. It's very powerful to, select more complex things. And later on, when we learn more about Vex, remember that you can use this knowledge in the group expression node. Another thing that is useful is you might have noticed if you want to separate parts of an object. In this case, I have already my groups coming from the Alembic, because I set in the Alembic the primitive groups to name group using transform node name, which just means give every element a group based on the name it originally had in the program it was created in, Maya, for example. And if I wanted to separate stuff, you might be used so far to the BLAST command. So here you can choose the group. I don't know, maybe I want to filter for everything that starts with crank. And then you know that you can invert it. And here are all my cranks now, whatever that means. And if you want to kind of separate it more and more, you might, go with other things like buffer maybe. There you go. Now we have the buffers and so on. The problem with this is you end up with a lot of blasts that are independent of each other. So what if I wanted to have, let's say, everything that is not the crank and not the buffer, but everything else? And this becomes tricky when you do this with a blast, because then you start to create a lot of blasts that do the invert of the first blasts. So there's a nice little tool called Split that I use all the time. And for some reason in many videos I don't use it, but I want to mention it because it's something I just use so often. So Split is like a blast basically. So you can choose what you want. So I don't know, I choose something bigger. Let's select it. You can say geometry groups, and then you can select groups. So maybe this part here and maybe this, I don't know. And that didn't seem to work. There's something wrong with the selection here. Okay. So what seemed to happen here is when I select something and press enter, I actually don't get one group of the one I selected, but I get two. So my assumption is here that for some reason there is a group now called Geo1 that entails everything. And this is why this is happening. This is why the selection didn't work. To fix this, actually, let's find another helpful node, and that is group delete. So let's make sure we delete this horrible Geo1 that creates all kinds of problems. And now the split should work exactly. Let's try this again. Now I'm not accidentally selecting the one that includes everything. So let's say I select a couple of groups here, and this time I can separate them. And the cool thing now is that I don't only have what I selected, but in the other output, as you could imagine, is all the rest. And this is cool because now I can do whatever I want with this one. I don't know, something stupid like give it a color. And then I can just merge it back together. And the cool thing about this, I can be sure that now everything is included, that I didn't forget anything. And you can even, if you want to do it more often than once, just combine the split. So I split everything except this front part, and then I select, let's say, the back part, very roughly. And now I can do stuff with that. So maybe turning that green for whatever reason. And then I still have all the rest that is not included in those two, and I can still merge them. So you can, have 10 splits combined to really make sure that at the very end, you still have everything back that you wanted. So Split is a really helpful tool that I use all the time, especially when you're not sure if your input might change later. This is a very safe approach. Okay, so those are a couple of tips about working with groups. I hope this is helpful. So thanks very much and see you later. Cheers.